Hello, and welcome to my review of the 2023 film Oppenheimer, directed by Christopher Nolan. I thought that I'd do a deep dive on this one. I'd really get into it, but I'm going to try and do this a bit more succinctly, and because my time is limited at the moment. But I want to talk about this film because I saw it in the cinema, and I had such a profound experience with it that it's worth talking about. Now, it's going to be included in one of my future movie marathons, but for now, as it's current, I thought I'd just make a quick review of it. Christopher Nolan directed and written. So I think the end credit said written for the screen, written and directed for the screen by Christopher Nolan. This is based on the book American Prometheus, about the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer, who was the man who was kind of dubbed the father of the nuclear bomb, the atom bomb. So back in the 40s, he was the director of the Manhattan Project out in the New Mexico desert and oversaw the construction of the first ever atomic bomb that was detonated on the Trinity site in the desert of New Mexico, which was a turning point in the very tail end of World War II and a turning point in human history. A weapon that has such power behind it that it's a potentially kind of world-ending device in terms of the amount of nuclear weapons that are on the planet right now. If we all start firing at each other, it's game over, nuclear holocaust style. Like it's pretty terrifying stuff. I've always been drawn to it in that kind of morbid way where you can't look away from a car crash kind of thing. It terrifies me. It's one of the scariest things imaginable, I think. It's just something very raw and powerful and unsettling about it. And it's not even just the bomb itself, it's the radiation and the sickness. And there's a great film, I can't grab it now, called On the Beach, which was made in the 50s, starring Gregory Peck, Anthony Perkins. And it's about this group of people living in Australia after a nuclear holocaust, and most of the world is wiped out. But in Australia, they're fairly safe, but the winds are bringing in this radiation, and so it's essentially like the world's about to completely fully end movie, and you see these characters going through this despair of knowing that it's game over, and it's a chilling film. It's a brilliant movie. I highly recommend it. Anyway, so Nolan here has taken the approach of a biopic of Robert Oppenheimer, as played by Cillian Murphy. And it's shot all in IMAX, 70mm, and the trailers were powerful. Seeing those trailers in an IMAX cinema were just like, with the sound rattling the seats was very overwhelming. And that's just the trailer, And so I was very intrigued to check this out in IMAX. It was like sold out almost on like a Tuesday morning, which is really interesting. I've not seen a cinema that packed since the first showing of No Way Home a couple of years ago. Every film I've seen since then has been like a bare, sparse room. But this one, it was packed out. I had to sit in the third row, which wasn't ideal, but it was okay. And, the whole screen, I mean, it's just that alone. And then the sound really adds so much. But it is 3 hours of men talking in rooms, basically. There's not a whole lot of action going on. There's a lot of close-ups. It's a very intimate movie in that sense, and in other senses as well. And the first hour I was staggered by, because it's essentially like an hour-long montage. Like the cutting is so quick. There's flashes of things, and Nolan is just like barraging you with this information, which may be even a criticism for some. But I was just so taken with that first hour, and then the second hour you're getting into the test, the building of the bomb, and the testing whether this thing is going to work or not, and if this is going to end the war. Not to prolong the war, but to end it once and for all, to end all war, which obviously wasn't really the case, but that was kind of the rationale that they had at the time. And then the third hour is about the ramifications of that bomb being created. But the whole movie is told backwards and forwards, and there's a present timeline, I say present, of Oppenheimer being he's not on trial, but he's being thoroughly assessed and interviewed and grilled over his previous ties to the Communist Party, and whether or not there were spies on the Manhattan Project, and whether he's a Soviet spy. And this is maybe, I forget the exact dating, but it's maybe like 5 to 10 years after the the bomb was created, and subsequently bombs were dropped on Japan. So you're dealing with Oppenheimer as he's kind of has remorse and regrets and kind of almost post-traumatic stress about what he created, and being grilled about whether he can keep his security clearance as it relates to the Atomic Commission at the time. Robert Downey Jr. plays, is it Lewis Strauss, who works in the Atomic Commission and sours on Oppenheimer and wants to get him out of it and get his security clearance revoked. I do think the film could have better established why that's important, but it did convey that Oppenheimer being, taken off the security clearance and was essentially kind of ruin his name and kind of really tarnish his legacy. And Strauss becomes kind of the villain of the movie in a sense. And Robert Downey Jr. is really, really good in the film. It's really great to see him in a non-Marvel role and to really see him stretch his acting chops again. His stuff is in black and white as more of the Strauss perspective of Oppenheimer and everything else going on in that part of the movie. And then the rest is in color, and that's Oppenheimer's point of view. A friend of mine on Facebook, she was talking about how she really thinks they should have depicted the bombs being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I disagree, and because it's from his point of view, he wouldn't have seen it, and so you can say, well, he would have imagined it. And in the film, you do see Oppenheimer's imagined kind of visions of quantum world and all sorts of particles and things and different chain reactions. But I think that there's an incredible sequence where the bomb's been dropped. Oppenheimer kind of gives a talk to the people at Los Alamos, where the Manhattan Project is being run from, and he's kind of giving this the world will remember this day, which is a line from the trailers, and they're all stomping their feet and stuff. And the background behind him is flickering out of focus, and it's shaking, and he's kind of, you can see that it's going through him what's actually happened, and the people are cheering and the feet are stomping, and then silence and just a single scream, bone chilling, and he looks out and there's flashes, and a woman's face is kind of flapping, the skin's flapping on her face. And then he's trying to walk out of the room, he's in a stupor, and he kind of steps on a charred corpse, and it's kind of A, tastefully done, and B, horrific at the same time. And for me, that conveyed him imagining, God, what must have the effect of this been on people? So, is the film trying to absolve him of, absolve? Is that a word? I don't know. Absolve? I don't know. Is that? Yeah. I don't know, actually. Is the film trying to free him up of any guilt? Or, not guilt because he's dead. But, is the film trying to free up any, moral implications? Is the film trying to clear his name in the sense of was it the right thing to do? No. The film is kind of fairly objectively showing you the creation of it. The one thing that got me was there was no real talk about the radiation implications of that bomb and future atomic bombs. And I don't know whether that's because they weren't really thinking about too much themselves at that point in time. You see many nuclear test footage pieces on YouTube where it's you see many nuclear test footage pieces on YouTube where there's just men sitting around watching nukes getting dropped, which, granted are miles away, but there's still fallout, So I feel like a lot of that maybe they weren't maybe as conscientious with it, or didn't have the knowledge, or just didn't think it would be that significant. I saw a tweet thread by someone who was really mad about the film being released and talked about her grandmother living, I think, 150 miles out from the Trinity site, and how the fallout traveled with a storm on the wind, and it affected her family and cancer and all that kind of stuff. But again, there's only so much you can fit, and it's really, again, from Oppenheimer's perspective and point of view. The cast of characters is unbelievable. Every other scene, you're like, oh, it's that guy. Oh, it's that guy. Gary Oldman. Just loads of different great kind of character actors and not so much character actors, but people who really fit their roles well. I have to say, Dane DeHaan, I love the actor. I think he's really good. But he still looks really young. And I saw a picture of the guy he's playing in the movie, and he looks a bit like a 20-year-old in a general's outfit. He played his part well, and certainly was effective, but he still looks youngish, even though he's not. I thought that Matt Damon was great as this kind of military general who's kind of working with Oppenheimer, and there's they kind of clash with their personalities, but they kind of know what they want from each other and stuff. Emily Blunt I thought was great as Kitty Oppenheimer, the suffering wife of the man himself. There's been criticisms around the female roles in this film, and I kind of think on one hand, it's the 1940s, and that's kind of the diminished role in society that women had, unfortunately, and this is just depicting that in a fairly realistic manner, but also giving you two different sides of like the stay-at-home mother in Kitty Oppenheimer, and how that affects her, and how him being so consumed by everything that at one point he just takes his child to a friend and says, "Can you watch them like for a while?" Because she can't handle this, and I'm there's all sorts of stuff going on in my head. In fact, he doesn't even say that. His friend knows that and kind of says like, "It's cool, I get it. Like the weight of which all these things are going around in your mind is understandable, but it's not a very good home life." And then he's a womanizer, and he had this relationship with a woman in the Communist Party, Jean Tatlock, played by Florence Pugh, who again has a brief role in the film, but it's fairly important in terms of his life, and kind of also the implications of him having a romantic affair with someone who's openly in the Communist Party, but also the fact that she died under suspicious circumstances, which is very interesting. And we get some sex scenes in the film. I have to say I was surprised by what he did with those sex scenes. Very interesting, and kind of in a way, there's been a whole big blow up on Twitter and stuff about like people who are all for like sex scenes and people who find them like graphic and distasteful and they shouldn't be in movies. We should cover everyone up. I'm kind of in the middle. I think that there are a lot of gratuitous sex scenes where I feel like I can feel the eye of the director just kind of leching over women and getting them to take their clothes off. And then there's times where I feel like it really adds to the story. And this kind of was done in an interesting way. And it was a refreshing aspect of just seeing these two actors just kind of sitting around naked, as some people would after having sex. But there was a lot of like uncomfortable shifting and coughing in the cinema, and I'm like, come on, like we've all seen a pair of like nipples, like what's the big fuss, whatever. But it was interesting what he did with those sex scenes, something we've never really seen Nolan do. But third hour, I was getting a little bit sleepy. This is only because my sleep schedule is really fucked basically, and I was venting coffee going into the film and during it. But it's a long film, and I will say, people say, "Oh, I didn't feel like it." It did feel like a 3-hour movie to me. It did maybe lag just a tiny bit. But I'll spare no kind of suspense to what how I would rate the film. It's a 5-star film for me. There are minor criticisms. I think watching it again with subtitles would improve my enjoyment. Not that I couldn't understand some of the dialogue, but there's a lot going on, and I kind of missed a few things of who that was and who that was, and and he doesn't hold your hand, which I like and I appreciate. Then there's the Trinity, test itself, which was just an incredible piece of cinema, very affecting, not what I was expecting. And, essentially, spoilers, the sound drops out, right? And you just hear the breathing. Now, in most cinema experiences I have, you'd hear rustling of crisps, or you'd hear someone with their hand in the bag just waiting to just dive their hand back in to shovel some more potato chips in their mouth. Potato chip? Why did I say potato chips? Crisps. Not an American, right? I'm British. Welsh. Not English. Okay. But this was like pin drop. Awesome. Like, this was packed out, 11 in the morning. These people are really interested in seeing this film and they're going to treat it seriously. I loved that. So when the sound dropped out, it was, I could experience the full power of this moment. And then obviously the sound hits you, but it was an overwhelming film at times in terms of the build up of the sound and feet stomping, different sound effects. And the very ending of the film really just, blistered tears into my eyes because it was just an overpowering crescendo in a way. And the film ends with essentially two people stood by a little pond talking, but the way that it's framed and the implications of this conversation, and the way that, again, as the very beginning shot of the film is Oppenheimer looking at these ripples in the rain, and he's picturing things. And so we begin and end with him picturing things. In the beginning, it's this kind of subtle, kind of, quiet calmness to it. And by the end, the imaginings are so overwhelming And the score by is it Ludwig Göransson. Wow, like it really rattled me. So as I'm leaving the cinema, like it was like an overcast day, right? A little bit of rain here and there, some showers. As I left the cinema, blue skies, off in the distance, these beautiful white clouds that just seem to go on forever and even look like mushroom clouds at times. I just stood there in the shade of this building, and there's a tree just swaying in the breeze, and I just thought, fucking hell, like it really makes you appreciate things like what we have now, even though the world has gone to shit, even though there's so much corruption, even though the world is heating up at an unprecedented rate, all this stuff, the politics, there's dissension, there's everyone's at each other's throats, there's just the concept of peace, I think, in this world is long gone, but there's still some stuff to appreciate, and it really upset me. I was not expecting it. I was expecting it to be kind of like I normally am when I watch like footage of a nuclear bomb going off. There's like this kind of primal, like unsettling, but kind of it's horrific beauty to it. But in this, it was just I came out feeling really rattled, and it really upset me all day. And it took the next morning to really kind of shake it off. And it was really that final like 45 seconds of the film that really did it. If that scene wasn't in there, then I wouldn't have felt as affected, I don't think, which shows you how much you can do in a short span of time. But also, it is the build-up of that previous 3 hours that kind of makes that ending work. But I like how it was kind of one of those kind of Christopher Nolan, like almost like the Inception ending, but he kind of reveals to you what the thing is at the very end, which I liked. But great performances. And I do think it was the right choice not to show the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And there was almost like I liked the way it portrayed his perspective in the terms of like, Hitler being killed or Hitler killing himself and the Germany part of the war being over. It's not really a moment. It's just like, it's almost like another day for Oppenheimer. It's almost not a concern for him, right? And the bombing of Hiroshima, you just hear like a radio broadcast of President Truman, announcing it. And so that, for me, really felt like it put you in Los Alamos. It put you in Oppenheimer's shoes in that case. I still feel like Oppenheimer as a character is still a bit obscured in the film, even though he's kind of dived into with a lot of depth. I still feel like there's stuff held back, which is maybe a pro and a con at the same time. Cillian Murphy was phenomenal. I've always thought he was a good actor, but he really brought it in this and was just phenomenal. But the whole cast was really great. Like they're all working in the same effort to make this a really great film, and I just felt like there wasn't really a bum note in the whole film, which is rare to say, especially in a film with so many characters and so many actors, and everything just seemed to work and fit. Although, maybe when I see Kenneth Branagh, I thought, they wheeled out Kenneth Branagh to do another accent, but he was still good. One thing I will say is that there's a lot of like shallow focus, and like the close-ups of people's faces, like it would be like the front part of their face would be out of focus, and maybe like this, the ears and the part of the eyebrows would be in focus, and it was very distracting at times. I wonder if the screening I saw it in was not maybe slightly out of focus. But I did look this up, and some people are saying this and thinking the same thing. I think it might just be the choice. And I saw someone rationalize it as, well, it's because it's Oppenheimer's perspective, and he's not really focusing on what's directly in front of him. Shut up, that's not what it is. That can't be what it is. And if it is, then holy shit, what a commitment. But I'm intrigued. I really want to get the 4K Blu-ray to see if it's as out of focus. Because I even went to the trailer. There's a shot of Kenneth Branagh, that's why I thought of it, where his face was kind of out of focus. I was like, Jesus. I went to the trailer. It doesn't look as out of focus there. So I'm wondering if it was just an issue with the screening I went to. I would have loved to have seen it on 70mm film, but there's only a handful of those in the whole of the UK. I think only like 30 globally. It is what it is, but even the IMAX screen I go to is not a legit IMAX screen, but the sound is really great, and the floor to ceiling screen. So I was happy with that, and and it isn't a film about like the main event of seeing this nuclear bomb go off, which purportedly all practical stuff and in small scale and big explosions and the force perspective, and I thought that stuff was really well handled and really well done. But it was a lot of the build up to it. It's a lot of build up in the film, a lot of suspense. and lots of interpersonal relationships, and I thought it was fantastic. It was great. I do think it is Nolan's. Well, no, I'm gonna hold back on that. I don't think it's Nolan's masterpiece. It is a masterpiece. I think I don't know. I don't know whether I'd class one of the Dark Knight movies as a masterpiece. Maybe I would, but I would say, well, I won't say what I think is his one best film. I won't say, because I'm going to do a ranking video of his filmography now, and I'll leave you in suspense for that. But I do think Oppenheimer is his second best film. I think, and you know, I definitely would. I know people would be upset when I tell them what I think is better than Oppenheimer, but um, it's probably the crowning achievement of his career at this point. I think the serious nature of the story gives it a bit more of prestige as well. I wouldn't be surprised if we see an Oscar win. It'd be overdue. I think Nolan needs an Oscar at this point. Not to bring it around to the Oscars, which are essentially meaningless anyway. But you know, I like the pomp and circumstance of the Oscars. I'd like to see Nolan's name on there. I'd like to see him win the big one, so to speak. But yeah, great film. Great historical accuracy at times. You know, I'm sure there are things that are blended here and there and stuff, but apparently it is fairly accurate to what went down. And also, I think this is a great jumping off point for people who want to look into stuff, which I've been doing. I watched a documentary about Oppenheimer's life, which filled in a lot of blanks. So it's educational, and I think that it's only right that people know about what happened during that time period in history. And you know, again, I said I was going to make a quick video, but I've gone into it, haven't I? It's over 20 minutes. But you know, for me, the idea of nuclear war is something that's terrified me since I was a kid, and it still scares me now. But I I think I won't see it in my lifetime, but I think eventually that button will be pushed. I just think that the whole mutually assured destruction thing is something that's really going to hold countries back. You know, like once a major attack goes down, you know that it's going back in the other direction. You're essentially hitting the suicide button when you make that decision. I think the fact that it's been, you know, what, 70, 80 years now since, I think that, like 1945. So that would be 55 plus 23, 60. So yeah, almost 80 years since the two only nuclear bombs dropped in, you know, in active combat. I mean, well, not that it was combat, it was just an absolute massacre, wasn't it? Genocide. It was terrible, but you know, it was done once and then twice, and that was it, and it's never happened again. There've been tests, but I just think that the fact that most major countries have their hands on these things is scary, but I also think it kind of negates all-out war. You know, I think again, I won't get into it too much, but I just think that it lingers in my mind. I dream about it sometimes. I do see these big nuclear explosions, and it's terrifying. But you know, it's the world that we live in, and it's this horrible, you know, and it does bring up the moral kind of implications of you know, what's, you know, the so many lives were lost. And you know, the Matt Damon line, "This is the most important fucking thing in the history of the world." Like, you know, this invention, this is going to kill a lot of people, but it's going to save so much more. I would say, me personally, I understand that rationale, but you know, morally, I think it's as reprehensible as any war, really. You know, when you think about it, and you can look at the death toll of people who died that day, and then subsequently through the radiation sickness and stuff, and then look at like the wider death toll of World War II, and maybe go, well, yeah, it's a bit, you know, uneven there. But you know, any kind of war, I think, is and that's one thing with the nuclear bombings, is that it was such a, you know, a huge unprecedented moment that it gets focused on a lot, and then you have a similar number of people being bombed and killed in less reported instances, in smaller ways, you know, spread out over many different places, and you know, people don't really feel that same impact and stuff. And so I feel like the people who make these decisions to bomb places, they're probably, I don't want to say happier, but they're probably more content to be dropping smaller bombs in many different places in ways that don't really get as widely reported, and so not as, the impact isn't as felt, and you probably end up killing more people that way anyway, which is a horrible thing to think about, but I think that's the way that it works sometimes. Anyway, I don't know why I went into that, but it's just, it makes you think. And when I stepped out of that cinema, it made me grateful, but it also made me want to go and find all the people that I love and give them a hug and just hold on just that little bit longer than I would ordinarily, because there's a lot of things we need to appreciate while we have them. Again, I hope that we'll see the end in my lifetime, but I do worry deeply about the future generation, which is another reason I was really rattled walking out of that cinema. So it's a very effective film. It's entertaining in its construction and its presentation of the story, but it's also, a huge cautionary tale that I think is still worth being told. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.